Okay, so get this. We're in Pine Hill.
Pine Hill.
Yeah. Idyllic town, successful
Oh,
couples.
yeah.
The Garners and the Johnsons. Everything's perfect, right?
Just like it.
Wrong.
No.
Turns out they had this secret arrangement, and let's just say it did not end well.
Oh, no.
We're diving into this YouTube video called Wife Swap Fantasy Turned to Obsession and Murder, and you are not ready for the twists this case takes.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know what strikes me is how this whole case really throws that whole keeping up with the Joneses thing right out the window.
Right.
You got these picture-perfect lives, but underneath it all, there's this, like, intense desire for something more, something taboo.
Totally. And, it all started innocently enough, or so they thought.
Okay.
Dinner party at the Garners, a little too much wine.
Oh.
And the conversation veers into, shall we say, uncharted territory.
Interesting. So, like, how did this even come up?
Well, it's fascinating how quickly the idea of wife swapping went from, like, shocking to thinkable for these couples.
Yeah. Like, initially, they set up all these rules, these boundaries, almost like a contract.
Oh, wow.
They were determined to keep their primary relationships intact.
Right?
But you have to wonder, can you really compartmentalize desire like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question, isn't it?
Exactly. And for a while, it seemed like they were actually pulling it off. They even went on vacations together, keeping their little secret hidden from their friends and neighbors.
Talk about living a double life.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So no one suspected anything?
Nope, not a clue.
Oh,
But you know what they say about secrets, right?
it's that.
They have a way of bubbling to the surface. And in this case, the catalyst for the unraveling was Daniel Garner.
Daniel Garner.
He was an architect, successful, charming, but, beneath that veneer, something darker was brewing.
Oh, so there were cracks in the facade.
Oh, yeah.
Big time.
So initially, Daniel was just a player in this game they'd all agreed to.
Right.
But then his interest in Jennifer Jonathan, Mark's wife, it became, well, let's just say it crossed a line.
He got a little too into it, huh? You could say that it wasn't just that he was attracted to Jennifer. It was the way his feelings, like, rapidly morphed into this all-consuming obsession.
Obsession, okay.
Have you ever known anyone who gets so fixated on an idea that it takes over their entire life?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think we all know someone like that.
That's exactly what happened to Daniel.
Wow.
His work suffered, he became withdrawn, and his relationship with his own wife, Linda, started to crumble. I mean, talk about red flag.
Yeah, huge red flag. And, it's important to note here that obsession isn't just some harmless infatuation.
Right.
It's like a recognized psychological phenomenon.
Oh, wow.
With very real and potentially dangerous consequences.
That's scary.
Yeah, and there's actually research that shows how obsessive thoughts can trigger the same neural pathways in the brain as addiction.
Really?
Yeah, so Daniel wasn't just head over heels. He was literally becoming addicted to Jennifer.
Whoa. That's a crazy thought. So basically, the more he thought about her, the more he needed to think about her.
Exactly. It's like
Right.
this vicious cycle,
Yeah, and what's even more troubling is that while Linda was picking up on the changes in Daniel,
Right.
she initially brushed it off as just jealousy.
Oh, no.
And Jennifer, did she notice anything was off about Daniel?
Well, it was this weekend cabin trip where Daniel basically wouldn't leave Jennifer alone.
Oh, no.
It was incredibly awkward for everyone. And Jennifer did try to voice her concerns to Mark, but he just dismissed it.
What?
Yeah, he thought Daniel was just being overly affectionate.
Seriously, her own husband didn't believe her. That's messed up. It's like she was trapped in this situation with no one to turn to.
It really is, and it's a classic example of how social dynamics can silence victims, especially when the perpetrator is someone who is, perceived as charismatic or trustworthy.
Right. And then things escalated even further when Daniel dropped this bombshell. He confessed his feelings for Jennifer, talking about leaving Linda and running away with her.
Oh, wow, so he was really going all in on this fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the guy's totally delusional, right? He's completely lost touch with reality.
He had constructed this elaborate fantasy in his mind. And when Jennifer tried to gently let him down to remind him of the boundaries they'd all agreed to,
Right.
he completely flipped out.
So what did he do? Did he just accept that it was over?
Let's just say Daniel didn't handle rejection well. He started following Jennifer, showing up at her work unannounced, leaving her messages. Jennifer, understandably terrified, decided to end the arrangement altogether.
And I'm guessing that didn't sit well with our friend Daniel.
No, it did not. You see, for someone like Daniel, who's deeply entrenched in this obsessive mindset,
Right.
rejection isn't just a blow to the ego, it's a threat to their entire sense of self.
Okay, so we've got a dangerous mix here. Obsession, rejection, and a fragile ego. This cannot end well.
You're right about that. One night while Mark was away on a business trip, Daniel decided to pay Jennifer an unexpected visit.
And that's when it happened.
The murder.
Yeah, that's when this twisted tale takes a truly dark turn. A neighbor heard a commotion, saw a struggle, and called the police. By the time they arrived, Daniel was gone, and Jennifer was dead.
This is awful.
Yeah.
So what about Linda? Where does she fit into all of this?
Linda's reaction to Daniel's confession and the subsequent events was complex, to say the least.
Not bad.
We'll delve into that in just a moment, but first, I think it's important to unpack the events leading up to the murder in a bit more detail. What stands out to you about Daniel's behavior?
Honestly, what strikes me is how Daniel's obsession seems to have blinded him to the reality of the situation. It's like he was living in his own world, completely detached from the consequences of his actions. It's like he created this alternate reality in his mind, like he and Jennifer were meant to be together.
Right.
And any obstacle to that,
Yeah.
including Jennifer's own feelings, was simply something to be overcome.
Right.
Obsession often distorts perception,
Yeah.
making it difficult to see the situation clearly or empathize with others.
And, I can't help but wonder, what role did the whole wife-swapping arrangement play in this?
Well, that's interesting.
Did it somehow fuel Daniel's obsession by blurring the lines between fantasy and reality?
That's a really insightful question. It's certainly possible that the arrangement, with its inherent secrecy and transgression,
Right.
created a kind of psychological pressure cooker for Daniel.
Right.
It normalized a level of intimacy and access to Jennifer that might have otherwise been unthinkable,
Yeah.
feeding his obsession and making it harder to control.
So you're saying that even though everyone initially consented to this arrangement, it may have inadvertently created the conditions for Daniel's obsession to spiral out of control?
Exactly.
Ugh.
It's a reminder that even when adults enter into unconventional relationships with seemingly clear boundaries,
Right.
there's always a risk of unforeseen consequences, especially when intense emotions are involved.
And in this case, the consequences were fatal. So let's go back to Linda. She knew about the arrangement. She saw the changes in Daniel. And yet she helped him cover up a murder. How do you make sense of her actions?
Linda's choices are incredibly complex and troubling.
Yeah.
Imagine being in her position. Your husband, the person you've built a life with, confesses to a horrific crime,
Right.
and you're suddenly faced with this impossible decision.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Do you turn him in knowing it will destroy your world, or do you try to protect him,
Right.
even if it means betraying your own moral compass?
It's almost like a twisted version of Till Death Do Us Part.
Right.
But surely she must have realized that helping Daniel wouldn't bring Jennifer back. It wouldn't erase what he had done.
You would think so, but in moments of extreme stress and trauma,
Yeah.
our brains don't always function rationally. Fear, loyalty, and the need to preserve some semblance of normalcy
Right.
can override logic and morality.
So are you saying that Linda wasn't thinking clearly? That she was somehow in shock?
It's likely a combination of factors. There's research that shows how trauma can impact our decision-making abilities, leading to impulsive or even reckless behavior. And let's not forget the powerful force of denial.
Right.
It's a common coping mechanism in situations that are too painful or overwhelming to confront directly.
So Linda might have been trying to protect herself from the horrific truth by convincing herself that somehow this could all just go away.
Exactly. And in the immediate aftermath of the murder, her actions seem to be driven by pure instinct.
Wow.
She cleans the crime scene, disposes of evidence, and helps Daniel concoct a believable alibi.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like she's operating on autopilot, doing whatever it takes to keep herself and Daniel safe from the consequences of his actions.
But even if she managed to fool the police, how could she live with herself knowing what she was covering up?
That's the tragedy of Linda's story.
Right.
By choosing to protect Daniel, she became entangled in a web of deceit
Right.
that ultimately consumed her own life. The guilt, the fear of being caught, the constant need to maintain the facade.
Right.
It all takes a devastating toll.
And wasn't there also this trip they took to a secluded cabin shortly after the murder?
Yes, and that trip speaks volumes about Linda's state of mind at the time. It's as if she was trying to recreate a sense of normalcy to convince herself that everything was fine,
Wow.
even as the weight of their shared secret threatened to crush them both.
So they're at this cabin trying to pretend everything's okay
Right.
while Daniel is falling apart, consumed by guilt and paranoia. What a mess-up situation.
It's a classic illustration of how covering up a crime can actually intensify the psychological torment.
Yeah.
Instead of finding relief, Daniel and Linda find themselves trapped in a cycle of fear and deceit, haunted by the ghost of Jennifer and the looming threat of exposure.
And it's all because of Daniel's obsession, his inability to let go, to accept that Jennifer didn't reciprocate his feelings.
Precisely. And this case highlights a crucial point about obsession. It's not romantic, it's not flattering.
Right?
It's a dangerous fixation
Yeah.
that can have devastating consequences not only for the object of the obsession, but for everyone involved.
Okay, so we've got Daniel spiraling out of control, Linda trapped in a web of deceit, and the police initially clueless. But surely the truth couldn't stay hidden forever, right?
You're absolutely right. The facade they so carefully constructed was bound to crumble eventually, and the cracks began to show when inconsistencies emerged in their alibis.
Oh, I bet that got the police's attention. What kind of inconsistencies are we talking about? So the police start digging a little deeper, and what do they find?
Well, it turns out that Daniel, in his panic state after the murder, made some pretty careless mistakes.
Oh, what?
He told a neighbor he was out of town, but in fact he was with Linda, creating their alibi.
Oh, wow.
And then there were these phone records that placed him near Jennifer's house around the time of the murder. Not exactly the smartest moves for someone trying to maintain a low profile.
Classic case of the cover-up being worse than the crime, huh? It seems like when people try to hide the truth, they just end up tripping over their own lies.
It's almost like a psychological self-sabotage. The guilt and anxiety of maintaining a lie can be so overwhelming that it leads to sloppy mistakes,
Yeah.
revealing cracks in the carefully constructed facade.
So the police have these inconsistencies. They're starting to suspect the Garners. What happens next?
They obtained a search warrant for the Garners' home. And, well, let's just say they hit the jackpot. Remember how Linda meticulously cleaned the crime scene?
Yeah.
She thought she'd erased all the evidence. But forensic technology is pretty amazing these days. Investigators found traces of Jennifer's blood in the Garners' car, hidden under the floor mats.
Talk about a smoking gun. You can try to run, you can try to hide, but the truth always has a way of coming out.
It's a powerful reminder that we can't escape the consequences of our actions no matter how hard we try to bury them. And for Daniel and Linda, the truth was about to come crashing down around them.
So what happened when they confronted the Garners with this new evidence? Did they try to deny it? Did they come up with another elaborate lie?
Faced with the undeniable evidence, Daniel finally cracked. He confessed to the murder implicating Linda in the cover-up. It was a dramatic turning point in the investigation, and for the community of Pine Hill, it was a devastating blow.
I can't even imagine the shock and betrayal people must have felt. Here were these seemingly perfect couples living seemingly perfect lives, and then, bam, their world is shattered by this horrific act of violence and deceit.
It's a stark reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even in idyllic communities like Pine Hill, darkness can lurk beneath the surface. This case really shook the town to its core, forcing people to question their assumptions about their neighbors, their friends, and even themselves.
So what was the fallout from Daniel's confession? What happened to him and Linda?
Both Daniel and Linda were arrested and charged. Daniel facing overwhelming evidence, and his own confession pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow. Life in prison. That's a heavy sentence, but I guess it fits the crime. What about Linda? What happened to her?
Linda's case was a bit more complicated. She was charged with obstruction of justice and accessory after the fact.
Okay.
Her lawyers argued that she acted out of fear of loyalty to her husband, but ultimately she too pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10.
So both of them ended up behind bars paying the price for their actions. And what about Mark? How did he cope with the loss of Jennifer and the betrayal of his supposed friends?
Mark's story is truly heartbreaking. He lost his wife, his trust in those closest to him, and his sense of security in the world. The trial was incredibly difficult for him, having to relive the details of Jennifer's death and the Garners' deceit.
Right.
In his victim impact statement, he spoke about the profound sense of emptiness and the struggle to rebuild his life after such a devastating loss.
Wow, just listening to this case is emotionally draining. I can't imagine what it must have been like for Mark to go through all of that.
It's a reminder that the ripple effects of crime extend far beyond the immediate victims. Families, friends, entire communities are impacted by acts of violence and betrayal, and the healing process can be long and arduous.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some key takeaways for our listener? What can we learn from this tragic tale of obsession, deceit, and the dark side of human nature?
I think this case underscores the importance of recognizing and addressing obsessive behavior in ourselves and others.
Yeah.
It's crucial to understand that obsession isn't love. It's a dangerous fixation that can lead to harmful and even deadly consequences. If you see signs of obsession in someone you know, or if you're struggling with obsessive thoughts yourself, it's essential to seek help. There are therapists who specialize in treating obsessive-compulsive disorder and other related conditions.
And it's also a reminder that we should never underestimate the power of truth. Lies and deception may seem like a quick fix in the moment, but ultimately they create this tangled web that can trap us in a cycle of guilt, fear, and ultimately self-destruction.
Absolutely. Transparency and honesty are the foundation of healthy relationships and communities. By fostering open communication and a willingness to address difficult issues head-on, we can create a safer and more supportive environment for everyone.
So, to our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Remember, beneath the surface of even the most seemingly perfect lives, there are always complexities and challenges. By being aware, being compassionate, and being willing to have those tough conversations, we can hopefully prevent these dark secrets from turning into devastating realities.